Another video of questionable purpose. It's a response video to the modern mystic, and I'm probably going to use rhetoric that's somewhat kind of connected to the internal conversation. And he's not listening to my videos or responding to them, and so this just might be of no value. I mean, unless you're watching his videos. Well, anyway, so he's making this point on taxes, but the premise that it's based on is this idea that all money is just made up digits, and it's just not true practically. They are made up, but they're accountable digits. They do have a name on them, and they're not. They're issued by. Well, I guess I'll hold the camera because I want to show the chart. They're issued by somebody, so they're exchanges between banks, mostly the digits, and they have a name on them. I mean, some bank owes some other bank. It's their word that the money's good, so to speak. And as the modern mystic fully knows, these digits eventually have to get resolved by going to the Fed and cash, and they're turned into their cash equivalent of real money, and the real money is transferred between accounts. So anyway, his proposal is that the government shouldn't tax, that it should just spend the money into existence by creating these fake digits. I don't think he means printing cash, so I guess he means we should somehow just encourage the banks to create fake digits and give them to us in some sort of IOU fashion, like the Federal Reserve accounts again. So QE has put $4 trillion of money into the bank's IOU column. The federal government owes them $4 trillion if they don't sell the assets the federal government bought with the borrowed money, essentially. And perhaps he thinks the federal government should put more money into those reserve accounts, more borrowed money from the banks, and ask the banks to spend money into existence to provide government services, welfare checks and whatnot. Like somehow, and only when inflation shows its head would the government have to tax to pay for expenditures. And the first argument you could obviously make is that sometimes there's lag in when inflation shows up, so such a system will give you no recourse to compensate for the inflation you created. But I mean, fundamentally, it's just a wrong idea. It's wrong-headed to think you can just manufacture fake money and that it never has to be paid back. This idea that you can borrow money forever and you never have to pay it back, I think, is fallacious. That the consequence of it is that we don't have interest rates anymore, and that there's just you're just creating a bunch of debt that has no meaning, IOUs that have no meaning, and you're going to have to eventually resolve them because you're creating a bunch of equity that isn't real, a bunch of claims on ownership that aren't real, and there's not enough reality for the claims on the pie, so to speak. So you're essentially overselling the pie when you maintain IOUs that are unpayable. They'll never be resolved into anything real. But anyway, I just make it clear that there hasn't been inflation because the government hasn't actually printed cash. It's borrowed money in different ways, okay, but it hasn't substantially printed a lot of cash. I mean, it has printed a lot of cash, and that's why we've had inflation. And as much as people talk like we haven't had inflation, no, if you were alive in the 70s, you know we've had a lot of inflation, that most things have increased in price somewhere between 400% and 500%. And here's basically a chart indicating that. So here's the 70s, you were probably at 100 billion in cash in the world, and now we're at 1.2 trillion. So there's a substantial difference in the amounts here listed, but as you can see, this line does go up precipitously, so if you take numbers from a higher from a further into this chart, like 1985, you can see that there's more room for accounting for inflation. But the point is that generally speaking, in a period from like say 1980 to the period, you know, where there might be 500% inflation, to the period now, that there would be a 500 or 600% increase in the amount of cash printed into circulation, currency in circulation. I don't think this chart is entirely accurate, but regardless, this is the trend line. And his you know, in one sense, he's suggesting that it's okay to maybe start really printing money. But I will argue that we're already in a trap that we can't get ourselves out of. We've issued too much insurance for FDIC insurance. It can never be. It won't cover the assets that we FDIC insured. So that's going to fail, and they're going to have to print cash to compensate for that, which is going to create inflation. This number is doomed to go way, way, way up. And as it goes up, real inflation is going to go up with it. Because what happens as soon as the government starts printing real cash, all the debt holders, all the people holding debt, IOUs, will know that their IOUs aren't worth anything, because they're going to get paid 50 cents on the dollar or 25 cents on a dollar. Nobody's going to want to hold debt in an environment where the money is devaluing. They'll hold it in some other currency, they'll hold it in some other place in the world, but they do not want to hold American debt if the Fed is printing cash. It'll devalue all of those assets that are denominated in dollars, unless those assets inflate with the rate of inflation. Which means, and if that takes place, then obviously it gets, if farmland starts selling for twice the price, or other commodities increase in price or value, double, that means basic necessities go from being 5% of your budget or 10% of your budget to 30% of your budget. And most people their budgets aren't making it now. And they certainly aren't going to make it if fuel and energy and food and all that stuff goes up much higher. So the cost of inflation will be just an annihilation of the value of holding debt, because no matter what interest you may be collecting on the debt, its value will be depreciating because the cash that monetize it will be deflated out of value. It will have no rational value. So I guess, look, the basic contention I'm making is the amount of money the Fed actually prints into circulation is coherent to real inflation in the economy, and that if you double the amount of money in circulation, you will create real hard inflation. Yeah, that's enough of a statement. So I think his video is irrational. I think it's irrational to think you can just, these digit things that he talks about, they're bank checks, okay? An electronic digit is just a replacement for a paper check. It's written on a bank. It's only as good as the bank's credit. That's as good as it is. The bank has to have assets to cover it, and once they don't have assets to cover it, the check isn't good anymore. The digit dies. And Federal Reserve digits are digits on the tax base. Again, and you can't just borrow digits without paying the person you borrowed them from something. And banks aren't going to want to give you free digits if you're printing digits, because they're going to know the digits you give them back aren't going to be worth the same amount as the digits they gave you. They're going to give you gold at $10,000 an ounce, and you're going to pay them back with gold that's only worth $5,000 an ounce. That kind of thing. Banks aren't stupid. So anyway, I don't know what to say. He studied the economy for 7 years or 6 years, and he's drawn a conclusion, I think, that's just ludicrous, that there's a bunch of unaccountable digit creation in the economy. It's not unaccountable. It just hasn't been accounted for yet. Okay, it hasn't been forced to show its strength. The digits have been accepted face value without any rational testing to see if they're going to hold up when you really try to get the stuff they're supposed to be a claim on. And the argument I'm making is that there's a bunch of digits that don't have any integrity, that if you tried to cash them out, you'll find there isn't any stuff behind them. So anyway, enough video.